A single dad, after 2 years of searching, pulls out a photo of his missing wife at a quiet diner, expecting another dead end. But when the waitress looks at the picture, her hand trembles. She points toward the kitchen and whispers words he never thought he'd hear. She's here. On the other side of that swinging door, a woman who looks exactly like his wife, but when their eyes meet, she doesn't recognize him or their daughter. Why is she working in a diner under a new name? What secret forced her to vanish without a trace? And when the truth finally comes out, will it bring their family back together or tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The pickup's engine coughed twice before dying in front of Murphy's diner. David Carter gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against worn leather. 2 years, 730 days of dead ends and false hopes. Dad? Grace's voice came soft from the passenger seat. You okay? David forced his shoulders to relax. The rearview mirror showed dust settling behind them. Another small town on another desperate search. Just tired, sweetheart. Grace returned to her sketchbook, pencil moving in careful strokes. David caught a glimpse. Another drawing of a woman with long, dark hair, the same face that filled page after page. His chest tightened. The diner's bell chimed as they pushed through the door. Cracked vinyl booths lined one wall. A counter stretched along the other, stools topped with faded red cushions. The air hung thick with bacon grease and burnt coffee. Sit anywhere you like. A woman called from behind the counter. Her name tag read Maria, and her smile reached warm brown eyes. David chose a booth near the window. Grace slid in opposite, already flipping to a fresh page in her notebook. The vinyl squeaked under David's weight as he settled, bones aching from hours of driving. Maria appeared with menus and a coffee pot. Long day? Something like that. David accepted the coffee gratefully. The first sip burned, but he welcomed the sensation. Anything to feel something besides the hollow ache. And for the young artist? Maria nodded at Grace. We've got chocolate milk that's pretty special. Grace glanced up, offering a tiny smile. Yes, please. While Maria fetched the milk, David pulled out his wallet. Behind the credit cards and receipts, folded into quarters, lived the photo. Laura's face smiled back at him, frozen in time at Grace's 8th birthday party. Her eyes sparkled with life that seemed impossible now. Here we go. Maria set down the chocolate milk. Ready to order? Just pie. Apple if you have it. David's appetite had vanished months ago. Make that 2 slices, Grace added quietly. Mom loves apple pie. Present tense. Always present tense with Grace. David's throat constricted. Maria's hand paused over her order pad. Something flickered across her face. Recognition? Sympathy? She jotted down the order and started to turn away. Wait. The word escaped before David could stop it. His fingers found the photo, unfolding it with practiced care. I'm sorry to bother you, but have you seen this woman? He'd asked the question hundreds of times. Gas stations, grocery stores, churches. The answer never changed. Maria took the photo and the color drained from her face like water down a drain. Her hand trembled. The order pad slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Where did you... She stopped, eyes darting to the kitchen swinging door. How long has she been gone? David's pulse hammered. 2 years. You've seen her? Maria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked at Grace, who had stopped drawing, pencil frozen mid-stroke. Then back to David. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. She's here. The words didn't make sense. David stared at Maria's trembling finger, pointing toward the kitchen door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone laughed at the counter. A truck rumbled past outside. What do you mean she's here? His voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Maria glanced around the diner. Only 2 other customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper and a trucker focused on his meal. She leaned closer. Started working about 3 weeks ago. Goes by Emma now. But that's her. She tapped the photo. That's definitely her. Grace's notebook fell to the table. Mommy? Shh. Honey. Maria's eyes filled with something David couldn't read. Fear? Pity? She doesn't talk about her past. Showed up looking scared, needed work. The owner, he doesn't ask questions when someone needs help. David's hands shook. Coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug, pooling on the worn formica. 2 years of searching, and Laura had been serving food in a diner 3 counties over? I need to see her. Wait. Maria reached for his arm, but David was already standing. The kitchen door swung on hinges that needed oil. It creaked a warning, or maybe a welcome. David couldn't tell which. His legs moved without permission, carrying him forward while his mind reeled. Grace scrambled from the booth. Dad! Through the circular window in the door, David saw movement. Someone at the grill, back turned, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, the same way Laura wore it when she cooked Sunday breakfast. His hand touched the door. Behind him, Maria's voice rose in alarm, but the words blurred into background noise. The door swung inward. The woman at the grill turned. Laura's face, thinner now, shadows under eyes that used to dance, a burn scar on her forearm that hadn't been there before. She held a spatula like a weapon, knuckles white. Their eyes met. The spatula clattered to the floor. No, the word tore from her throat. No, you can't be here. David stood frozen, coffee cooling in his hands as Grace pushed past him into the kitchen. Behind them, Maria's whispered prayers mixed with the hum of fluorescent lights and the sizzle of forgotten eggs burning on the grill. David's pulse raced like a runaway train. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, attempting to soothe Grace with a steady hand. Her small face mirrored his confusion, but he had no words to offer comfort. "Stay here, sweetheart," he murmured. But Grace's grip tightened on his sleeve. He hesitated only a moment before moving forward, Grace trailing behind him like a shadow. The kitchen door swung open under his hand, revealing a world of clattering dishes and the hiss of steam. There she was, dark hair tucked under a diner cap, balancing a tray of plates. The sight stopped him cold. Laura? The name was both plea and prayer. The clatter of fallen plates snapped through the air, porcelain shattered against tile, an echo of the chaos within him. Recognition flickered, then vanished from her eyes. Fear replaced it, palpable and raw. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled, matching the quiver in her steps as she backed away. "I don't know you." David's throat constricted. "You do, love. It's me, David. It's Grace." "Stay away." Her words came sharp, cutting through the space between them. She stumbled toward the back door, pushing it open with shaking hands. Grace darted forward, her cry a broken tether. "Mom!" Maria reached Grace first, pulling her close with gentle but firm arms, a protective wall. David felt the pull of his daughter's distress, but could do nothing as he stumbled into the alley. Night embraced him, biting cold against his skin. He watched helplessly as Laura, Anna, whoever she'd become, disappeared into shadows beyond the reach of the streetlights. The alley seemed to stretch infinitely, a chasm that swallowed her whole. Maria joined him, her presence a small warmth in the chill. "David," she began softly, "she came to us weeks ago, bruised, scared, said she had nowhere else to go. She called herself Anna." Her words fell, each adding weight to David's heart. She wouldn't talk about what happened. David's mind spun, a maelstrom of lost time and unanswered questions. A vow rose within him, quiet but unbreakable. "I won't lose her again." Exhaustion settled in as they drove home, Grace drifting to sleep against the window, her tear-streaked face softening in slumber. David clung to the photo, an anchor in a sea of doubt. Headlights sliced through the dark, path illuminated, but destination unclear. Laura's face, captured in happier times, watched him from the photo, and though he drove into unknown shadows, one truth burned bright: he would bring her back. Morning light filtered through the farmhouse kitchen windows, painting golden squares across worn linoleum. David cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence. His movements were mechanical, practiced from 2 years of single parenting. Grace shuffled in, hair tangled from sleep, dragging her favorite blanket behind her. She climbed onto the wooden stool at the counter, watching him flip the eggs with the same careful attention she gave her drawings. Is Mom coming home now? The spatula paused mid-air. David kept his eyes on the pan, searching for words that wouldn't break either of their hearts. Sometimes, he said slowly, sliding eggs onto her plate, when people get hurt, healing takes time. Like when you scraped your knee last summer, remember? It didn't get better right away. Grace pushed scrambled eggs around her plate. But knees don't forget. The simple truth of it stole his breath. He crossed to her, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. No, sweetheart. They don't. The drive to school passed in comfortable quiet, Grace's sketchbook pressed against her chest like armor. David watched her walk through the school gates, small shoulders squared with determination that reminded him painfully of Laura. The diner parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived. Through the window, Maria moved between tables, refilling salt shakers. She looked up at the bell's chime, offering a tired smile. Coffee? She poured without waiting for an answer, the dark liquid steaming in the morning chill. David wrapped his hands around the mug. Does she... Every day. Maria slid into the booth across from him. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Shows up for her shifts, keeps her head down, barely speaks except to take orders. She leaned forward, voice dropping. David, you need to be careful. Yesterday, one of the truckers raised his voice about cold eggs. She dropped a whole tray and locked herself in the bathroom for 20 minutes. The coffee turned bitter in his mouth. Someone hurt her. Someone terrified her. Maria's fingers drummed against the table. Whatever happened, it's still happening in her mind. You push too hard, she'll run. David settled into a corner booth with a clear view of the kitchen door. The lunch crowd came and went. Afternoon stretched long, punctuated only by Maria's occasional refills and sympathetic glances. At 4:30, the bell chimed. Laura stepped through the door in her uniform, apron folded over her arm. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Recognition flashed, raw and undeniable, before she turned away, hurrying toward the kitchen. David waited, patient as he'd learned to be fixing engines, knowing that forcing stuck parts only caused more damage. Her break came at 6. She emerged from the kitchen, heading for the back door with a cup of tea. David rose slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, unthreatening. Laura? She froze, but didn't flee. Progress. I won't touch you, he said softly. Just, can we talk? She turned halfway, clutching the tea like a shield. Her face was thinner than he remembered, cheekbones sharp beneath tired eyes. Grace drew this yesterday. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, setting it on a nearby table. It's our old garden, the one you planted behind the house. Remember the tomatoes that wouldn't grow until you sang to them? Laura's gaze flickered to the drawing. A child's rendering of vegetables and flowers, stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. You planted marigolds between the rows because you read they kept bugs away. Grace helped, got dirt all over her Sunday dress. You laughed so hard you cried. Tears welled in her eyes now, different tears. She shook her head violently. Sunday mornings, David continued, voice steady despite the ache in his chest. You'd make French toast with too much cinnamon. Grace would steal bites before church. We'd walk to service together, her between us, swinging from our hands. Stop. The word came out broken. The lullaby you hummed while cooking. You are my sunshine. Grace still sings it when she's scared. Laura's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The teacup trembled, liquid sloshing dangerously. I don't know you. The words were desperate, pleading. I can't know you. She fled back to the kitchen, the door swinging in her wake. David stood alone in the fading light, the drawing still on the table, Grace's happy family waiting under that bright crayon sun. He drove home with renewed determination burning in his chest. Whatever had stolen Laura's memory, or made her bury it, he would find a way through. Love had to be stronger than fear. That night, Grace lay tucked beneath her quilt, clutching her stuffed rabbit. David sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing hair from her forehead. "Did you find her?" Her voice was small in the darkness. "I saw her again today." Grace's eyes opened, catching moonlight. "Did she remember us?" David chose his words carefully. "Not yet. But she heard me. That's something. Maybe she needs more time." Grace yawned, burrowing deeper into her pillow. "Like the seeds we planted. They looked dead for weeks, then suddenly there were flowers." David kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Maybe you're right, sweetheart." He stayed until her breathing deepened into sleep, watching over her in the dark, guardian of hope and broken promises, determined to make their family whole again. The following evening, David picked Grace up from school, her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders as she climbed into the truck. "We're going to the diner again?" She clutched her sketchbook, already knowing the answer. "If you want to." Grace nodded, fingers tracing the spiral binding. "I made something new today." Mrs. Henderson said it was beautiful. The diner buzzed with dinner rush energy. Silverware clinked against plates. Conversations overlapped in comfortable chaos. The smell of meatloaf and gravy hung thick in the air. David guided Grace to a corner booth, same as yesterday, with a clear view of the kitchen's swinging door. Grace spread her colored pencils across the table, tongue poking out in concentration as she added final touches to her drawing. David nursed his coffee, watching steam curl upward, counting each swing of that door. 20 minutes passed. 30. The dinner crowd thinned slightly, leaving pockets of quiet between bursts of laughter. From the corner table, where local farmers gathered every Thursday. Then Laura emerged, balancing a loaded tray. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, wisps framing her face. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, never quite looking their way. Grace stood suddenly, drawing in hand. "Grace, wait!" But she was already moving, weaving between tables with the determination only children possess. She planted herself directly in Laura's path, holding the paper high. Laura stopped so abruptly the dishes rattled. The drawing showed 3 figures in a garden, stick people, but rendered with such care that their joy was unmistakable. Bright flowers surrounded them. A yellow sun beamed from the corner. The woman figure wore a purple dress, Laura's favorite color, though Grace couldn't have known that now. "I drew us," Grace said simply. "In our garden. The one behind our house." Laura's hands shook. The tray tilted dangerously. A water glass slid, caught at the last second by muscle memory. Her eyes locked on the drawing, drinking in every crayon stroke. "You used to sing there." Grace's voice carried that earnest quality that made adults stop and listen. "While you picked tomatoes. You said plants grew better with music." The tray lowered slowly to a nearby empty table. Laura took the drawing with both hands, holding it like something precious and fragile. Tears tracked down her cheeks, dropping onto her uniform. "This song." Her voice cracked, barely audible, above the diner's hum. "The one I used to sing at bedtime. What was it?" Grace began to hum, soft and sweet. The melody floated between them, simple and haunting. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Laura's lips moved, following the rhythm. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, she hummed the last line with grace. "Please don't take my sunshine away." Their voices merged for those few notes, mother and daughter, separated by fear, but connected by something deeper. David's chest tightened, hope flooding through him like morning light. Laura's hand reached toward Grace's face, almost touching. The front door slammed open. Laura jerked back, the drawing fluttering to the floor. Her face drained of color, eyes wide with sudden terror. She spun toward the kitchen, moving fast, almost running. "Mom!" Grace called after her, but Laura was already gone, the door swinging violently in her wake. Maria appeared at David's elbow, guiding Grace back to their booth. Her usual warmth was edged with worry. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, settling Grace with a glass of chocolate milk that appeared from nowhere. "She's been jumpy all week." Keeps looking over her shoulder. What happened to her? David kept his voice low, aware of Grace listening, while pretending to reorganize her pencils. Maria glanced around, then leaned closer. "About a month ago, before you started coming, a man showed up. Well-dressed, expensive suit, not from around here. He asked about new employees, showed a photo. Not of Laura exactly, but close enough that I noticed her hiding in the kitchen." "Did he threaten her?" "Not directly, but after he left she was different, scared, begged me not to tell anyone she was here, said people could get hurt." Maria's fingers twisted her order pad. "David, whatever she was running from, it hasn't given up looking." The weight of it settled over him. This wasn't just about memory or trauma. Laura was in danger, real danger, and now, by being here, maybe they were too. Grace had gone quiet, adding delicate details to a new drawing. David recognized their old house, every window carefully placed. "We should go," he said softly. Grace gathered her things without argument, though disappointment weighted her movements. As they passed the kitchen door, David heard voices inside. Laura's among them, high and frightened. He wanted to rush in to protect her, but Maria's hand on his arm stopped him. "Give her tonight," she whispered. "Let her remember that lullaby. Let it work on her." They drove home through empty streets, street lights creating pools of yellow in the darkness. Grace hummed in the back seat, the same lullaby over and over. David found himself humming along, harmony to her melody, both of them carrying Laura's song through the night. The sound followed them into the house, up the stairs, into their dreams. Somewhere across town, David hoped Laura heard it too, calling her home. The morning routine felt mechanical. David braided Grace's hair while she ate toast, her questions about last night hanging between them like morning mist. "She remembered the song, Dad." She did. "I know, sweetheart." He secured the elastic band, smoothing down a stubborn cowlick. Sometimes memories take time to find their way back. At the school gates, Grace turned before joining her classmates. "Tell Mom I'll draw her more pictures." "As many as she needs." David watched her disappear into the building, that familiar ache settling in his chest. 10 years old and already carrying weight that shouldn't belong to children. The diner parking lot was nearly empty at 9:30. Through the window, he could see the breakfast crowd had cleared, leaving only 2 old-timers nursing coffee at the counter. Maria stood outside the entrance, arms crossed, scanning the street. "Not here," she said when he approached. Her usual warmth had been replaced by something sharper, more cautious. "Walk with me." They circled around to the back alley, past the dumpsters and delivery entrance. Maria kept glancing over her shoulder, fingers drumming against her apron. "You need to know what she told me." Maria stopped near a stack of milk crates, voice dropping low. "When Laura first showed up, when she called herself Anna, she was in bad shape. Bruises on her arms, a cut above her eye. Looked like she hadn't slept in days." David's jaw tightened. The thought of anyone hurting Laura made his hands curl into fists. "She wouldn't talk at first. Just worked, kept her head down. But one night, maybe 2 weeks ago, she broke down, started crying in the storage room, couldn't stop." Maria pulled her cardigan tighter despite the morning warmth. "She told me she'd been working at some company. Administrative work, filing, that sort of thing. The owner was this man named William Blake." The name meant nothing to David, but Maria spoke it like a curse. "Big money type. Owns half the businesses 3 towns over. Construction, shipping, you name it." Maria's expression darkened. Laura found something in the files, records that didn't match, money moving where it shouldn't. She tried to do the right thing, went to her supervisor. And her supervisor went straight to Blake. Maria's voice cracked slightly. That night, Blake showed up at your house. Laura wouldn't tell me everything, but he made it clear what would happen if she talked. Not just to her, to you, to Grace. The alley seemed to spin. David braced himself against the brick wall, processing what Maria was telling him. Laura hadn't left them. She'd been driven away. She came home that night with bruises, David. Blake's men had made their point. She packed a bag and left before dawn, thinking if she disappeared, you'd both be safe. But why not tell me? Why not? Because Blake has people everywhere. Cops, judges, city officials. She knew if she told you, you'd fight. And Blake doesn't fight fair. Maria touched his arm gently. She gave up everything to keep you and Grace safe. That's why she won't remember. It's not that she can't. She's terrified that remembering will bring Blake back to your door. David's legs felt weak. 2 years of thinking Laura had abandoned them, 2 years of Grace asking why Mommy left, and all along Laura had been protecting them. The weight of it crushed down on his shoulders. There's more. Maria glanced toward the street again. Last week a man came in asking questions. Expensive suit, cold eyes, showed a picture of Laura around but with her maiden name. I told him I'd never seen her, but he didn't look convinced. Blake's people? Maybe. Or maybe Blake himself. Laura saw him through the kitchen window and nearly fainted. She hid in the freezer until he left. Maria gripped David's arm tighter. He might know she's here. You need to be careful, all of you. The implications crashed over David like cold water. This wasn't over. Laura was still in danger, which meant Grace was too. The man who'd terrorized his wife into disappearing was possibly circling back, hunting for her. I should take Grace and leave town. And go where? Blake has resources you don't. Running might make things worse. Maria released his arm, stepping back. Laura needs to see that you can protect her, that Grace is safe. Maybe then she'll let herself remember. David nodded slowly, mind already working through possibilities. He needed information about Blake, needed to understand what Laura had discovered. Most importantly, he needed to keep his family safe while doing it. Thank you for telling me. Maria squeezed his shoulder. She loves you both. I see it every time Grace walks in, the way she watches you from the kitchen. She's fighting to stay away because she thinks it's the only way to protect you. David walked back to his truck in a daze. The morning had shifted from bright to overcast, clouds gathering like his thoughts. He sat behind the wheel outside Grace's school, engine off, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. 2 years of prayers asking why. 2 years of Grace's tears, and Laura had been out there, alone and terrified, sacrificing everything for them. The storm inside him built, rage at Blake, guilt for not knowing, desperate love for Laura, fear for what might come next. But beneath it all, a steady resolve began to form. This wasn't just about finding Laura anymore. It was about ending William Blake's hold over their lives. The wrench slipped from David's grip for the 3rd time that morning, clattering against the concrete floor of Morrison's auto shop. Oil stained his hands, but his mind wasn't on the Ford's transmission spread across his workbench. Everything all right there, Carter? Old Tom Morrison peered over from the next bay, concern etching his weathered face. Fine. David retrieved the wrench, forcing himself to focus on the gear assembly. But William Blake's name kept echoing in his thoughts. A man with enough power to terrorize Laura into abandoning her family. A man who might still be hunting her. The transmission blurred. David saw Laura's face instead. That terrible blankness when she'd looked at him in the kitchen. The fear that flashed when she'd dropped the tray. 2 years she'd been running. 2 years carrying that weight alone. Take a break, Tom said, suddenly beside him. Whatever's eating at you, it ain't gonna get solved staring at engine parts. David nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Outside, he leaned against the shop's brick wall, watching traffic pass on Main Street. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that men like Blake existed in their shadows. The school day dragged like molasses. 3 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. When Grace climbed into the truck, her face bright with anticipation, David's heart squeezed. "We're going to see Mom again tonight?" "We are, sweetheart." Grace clutched her sketchbook tighter. "I drew our old garden. The one with the tomatoes that grew taller than me. Maybe she'll remember that." The diner parking lot held fewer cars than usual for a Thursday evening. Through the windows, David counted maybe a dozen customers scattered across the booths. The dinner rush had passed, leaving behind the quiet regulars who nursed coffee and pie. Inside, the jukebox played something slow and wistful. Plates clinked in the kitchen. The coffee maker hissed. Normal sounds that felt anything but normal as David and Grace slid into their usual booth. Maria appeared with menus they didn't need. "She's been asking about you," she whispered. "Keeps looking at the door." Hope fluttered in David's chest. Grace opened her sketchbook, revealing the garden drawing, rows of vegetables, the wooden fence David had built, Laura's sun hat hanging on a post. They waited. Through the kitchen's porthole window, David caught glimpses of movement. Laura was there, he knew, gathering courage, or maybe fighting against it. 20 minutes passed. Grace colored in the tomato plants, adding red with careful strokes. The bell above the door chimed as customers left, thinning the crowd further. Then Laura emerged, coffee pot in hand. She moved between tables, refilling cups, her movements practiced but tense. When she reached their booth, she hesitated. "Coffee?" "Please." David pushed his cup forward. Their fingers nearly touched as she poured. She pulled back quickly, but didn't leave. "Your break's coming up," Maria called from behind the counter. 15 minutes? Laura set the pot on an empty table. She stood there wrestling with something before sliding into the booth across from them. Grace looked up from her drawing, eyes wide with hope she couldn't hide. "Tell me," Laura said quietly. "Tell me about Sundays." David's throat tightened. Sunday mornings were for pancakes. You'd make them in shapes, hearts for Grace, stars, sometimes dinosaurs. The kitchen would smell like vanilla because you always added extract to the batter. Laura's hands trembled on the table. "And the apple tree," David continued, voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to break through. "I hung a swing from the biggest branch. You were worried it wasn't strong enough, made me test it 5 times before letting Grace on it." "The rope was yellow," Laura whispered. "Bright yellow because Grace picked it out at the hardware store." Grace gasped softly. David reached across the table, not quite touching Laura's hand. "Her first spelling bee was in 2nd grade. You drilled her on words every night for 2 weeks. When she won, you cried harder than she did." "Concatenation," Laura breathed. The winning word was concatenation. The diner sounds faded. There was only their booth, their shared memories stirring like dust in sunlight. Grace pushed her sketchbook forward, showing the garden. "You planted marigolds between the tomatoes. Said they kept the bugs away." Laura traced the drawing with one finger. The fence. David built it crooked. The left side leaned, but he was so proud of it I never said anything. "I knew." David's voice was rough. "You never were good at hiding your thoughts." A tear slipped down Laura's cheek. Grace started humming then, soft and sweet. The lullaby that had lived in their house like wallpaper, present in every bedtime, every scraped knee, every thunderstorm that sent Grace running to their bed. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry," Laura sang, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama's going to sing you a lullaby." More tears came. Grace joined in, their voices weaving together like they had 1,000 times before. Laura's hand moved across the table, trembling, and touched Grace's cheek. The gesture was so familiar, so purely mother, that David's own eyes burned. "My baby," Laura breathed. "My sweet Grace." The moment stretched, delicate as spun glass. The diner, the danger, Blake. Everything fell away. They were a family again, even if just for these few seconds. Then Laura's hand dropped. The fear crept back into her eyes, like fog rolling in. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She stood abruptly, backing away from the table. "I have to. The kitchen needs—" She fled through the swinging door, leaving David and Grace in a booth that suddenly felt too large. But something had shifted. The wall Laura had built wasn't impenetrable. Her memories, her love, they were still there, fighting to surface. Grace looked at her father, eyes shining with tears and hope. She remembered, Dad. She remembered. David parked outside Grace's school, watching kids stream through the doors. When Grace climbed into the truck, he caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "How about dinner at the diner tonight?" Her face brightened instantly. "Really? On a Tuesday?" Sometimes Tuesdays need to be special. The drive felt shorter, with Grace's excitement filling the cab. She chatted about her art project, a collage about family traditions, and how Mrs. Henderson said she could include the lullaby somehow, maybe written along the edges. Maria spotted them the moment they walked in. Without asking, she led them to a booth in the back corner, away from the kitchen's chaos and the bell's constant chiming. "She's been different today," Maria murmured as she handed them menus, humming while she works. "Haven't heard that before." David ordered Grace's favorite, grilled cheese with extra pickles, and watched the kitchen door. His coffee grew cold between his hands. When Laura emerged for her break, she hesitated only a moment before walking to their booth. The apron was still tied around her waist, a pen tucked behind her ear. She slid in beside Grace instead of across from them. "Tell me about school," she said, and Grace launched into the story of her art project. "I'm using magazine pictures, but also drawing some parts. Mrs. Henderson says mixing media creates depth." Grace's hands moved as she talked, sketching shapes in the air. "I found a picture of a garden that looks just like ours used to." "Used to?" Laura's voice caught. "Dad hasn't planted anything since." Grace trailed off, suddenly aware of the weight in her words. "Since I left." Laura finished it quietly. David pushed his plate forward. "Hard to tend a garden, and everything else." "The tomatoes probably took over," Laura said, a hint of their old life creeping into her voice. "They always grew wild if you didn't stake them right." "Remember when the neighbors' chickens got into them?" Grace giggled. "Mrs. Patterson's hens were red from head to toe." Laura laughed then, really laughed. The sound hit David like a physical thing. 2 years of absence suddenly filled. Other diners glanced over, but he didn't care. That laugh belonged to Sunday mornings and bedtime stories, to the woman who'd slow danced with him in the kitchen while dinner burned. "They looked like they'd been in a food fight," Laura added, wiping her eyes. "Mrs. D. Patterson made us take a dozen eggs as an apology, even though it was her chickens that broke through." They ate together, Laura stealing fries from Grace's plate like she always had. Grace talked about her teacher, her friends, the library's summer reading program she wanted to join. Normal things, family things. As the dinner crowd thinned, Laura's fingers drummed against the table, an old nervous habit. "I remember things," she said suddenly. Flashes like photographs. Grace's voice asking for water at midnight, the way David's cologne smelled when he came home from work. Motor oil underneath something woody. "Old Spice," David said, "so same kind my father wore." The porch swing. Laura's eyes closed. It creaked on the left side. "You kept saying you'd oil it, but I liked the sound. Knew when you were coming before you reached the door." Grace leaned into her mother's side. "You used to read there." Big books with torn covers from the library sale. Mysteries mostly. Laura's arm came around Grace automatically, naturally, trying to guess the ending before... She stopped, her whole body tensing. Through the window, a black sedan crawled past, too slow for normal traffic. "It's just a car," David said, but Laura had already pulled away from Grace. "You don't understand. William has people everywhere. The police, the courthouse. If he knows I'm here, If he thinks I'm talking to you, we're already in danger without you." Grace's words came out simple, matter of fact. The innocence in them, the truth, shattered something in Laura's face. "Oh, baby." Laura pulled Grace against her, burying her face in her daughter's hair. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "My brave, sweet girl." David reached across the table, his hand covering Laura's where it rested on Grace's back. "Come home, just for one night. See the house, your garden. Remember who you are." Laura lifted her head, mascara streaking her cheeks. "The house?" "Same as you left it. Your coffee mug still by the sink. Your bookmarks still in that mystery you never finished." "Tomorrow night," Laura whispered, like she was testing the words. "After my shift?" "We'll wait up," Grace said, squeezing tighter. "Dad'll make cocoa." "With the little marshmallows?" "The tiny ones you like," David confirmed. Laura extracted herself slowly, reluctantly. "I should get back. But tomorrow." She stood, smoothing her apron with shaking hands. "Tomorrow after 8, just for a little while." She walked back to the kitchen, pausing at the door to look back. David saw it all in her face, fear and hope wrestling for control, love winning by the narrowest margin. Maria appeared with the check, but David barely noticed. Tomorrow. Laura was coming home tomorrow. Grace hummed the lullaby softly as they left, and through the kitchen window, David could see Laura watching them go, one hand pressed against the glass. The gravel crunched under Laura's feet as she stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the farmhouse. 8:15. She'd sat in her car for 10 minutes, working up courage. "Mom!" Grace burst through the screen door, racing down the porch steps. Laura caught her daughter, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Hey, sweet girl. Dad's making your pot pie. The whole house smells like butter." Laura's eyes misted as she climbed the porch steps. The third one still creaked. The wind chimes she'd hung 3 Christmases ago still sang in the breeze. David stood in the doorway, dish towel over his shoulder, flour dusting his shirt. "Kitchen's waiting for you," he said softly. She stepped inside, and time collapsed. The mismatched chairs around the oak table, the rooster clock that ran 5 minutes fast, her apron still hanging on the hook by the stove, faded sunflowers barely visible on the fabric. "I kept everything," David said, watching her take it in. "Couldn't bring myself to change anything." Laura's fingers traced the counter where she'd rolled out countless pie crusts, the windowsill where her herbs had grown. The spider plant in the corner had tripled in size, its babies cascading toward the floor. "You watered my plants." "Grace did. Said you'd be upset if they died." Grace tugged Laura to the table. "Look what I made while you were gone." Sketches spread across the wood, dozens of them. Their family at the county fair, Laura braiding Grace's hair, David fixing the truck while they brought him lemonade. Memory after memory captured in careful pencil strokes. "This one's my favorite." Grace held up a drawing of all 3 of them in the garden, Laura's sun hat too big for her head, David's smile crooked like always. "You caught his smile perfect," Laura said, her voice thick. "That little lift on the left side." The timer buzzed, and David pulled the pot pie from the oven, golden crust bubbling through the vents he'd cut in the shape of hearts, the way Laura always made them. "Still remember the recipe?" "Your grandmother's. Cup of cream, not milk. Extra time." He set it on the table. "Burned the first 2 attempts this week practicing." They sat in their old spots, David at the head, Laura to his right, Grace between them. The overhead light cast the same warm glow Laura remembered, picking up the amber flecks in Grace's eyes. "Remember when Dad tried to make this without the recipe?" Grace giggled, serving herself. "The crust was like cardboard." "Concrete," Laura corrected, smiling. "We buried it in the backyard so the garbage man wouldn't judge us." "Marked it with a cross and everything," David added. They ate and talked, careful stories that skirted around the missing years. Grace dominated the conversation, filling silence with chatter about school plays and science projects, her best friend Maya's new puppy, the library cat that let her pet it sometimes. Laura's eyes kept moving to the photos on the wall, their wedding. Grace's first birthday, cake smeared across her cheeks, last Christmas before, she stopped at that one. They looked so unaware of what was coming. "Time for bed, little artist," David said as Grace yawned over her empty plate. "Mom, will you tuck me in?" Laura's breath caught. "If that's okay." Grace grabbed her hand, pulling her down the hall. Her room hadn't changed either. Purple walls, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, stuffed animals standing guard on the shelves. Grace climbed under her quilt, the one Laura had sewn from her old dresses. "Will you sing the song?" Laura sat on the bed's edge, smoothing Grace's hair back. The melody came without thinking, her voice finding notes she thought she'd forgotten. "Sleep now, my darling. The stars are so bright. Dream of tomorrow, everything's right. The moon keeps you safe through the night." Grace's eyes fluttered closed, but her smile stayed. "You remembered all the words. Some things you don't forget, baby." Laura kissed her forehead, breathing in the smell of strawberry shampoo and childhood. In the doorway she paused, watching Grace curl into her pillow, peaceful in a way that made Laura's chest ache. David waited on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee steaming on the rail. The swing creaked as she settled beside him, that left side squeak she'd missed more than she'd realized. "She grew so much," Laura said. "Stubborn, like her mother. Wouldn't let me change anything in your garden, even when the tomatoes went wild." The garden. Laura could see it in the moonlight, overgrown but alive. "I dreamed about it. Couldn't remember why it mattered, just knew it did. You planted it the first spring we moved in, said you wanted Grace to know where food came from. She helped." The memory surfaced clearly, insisted on naming all the tomato plants, called the big one Frederick. Still does. They rocked in comfortable silence. Inside, the house held its breath around them, waiting. David's hand rested on the swing between them. Laura looked at it, remembering how those fingers felt laced through hers. "Pieces are coming back," she said, "like a puzzle assembling itself. This morning I remembered your mother's maiden name. Tonight, sitting at dinner, I remembered teaching Grace to tie her shoes. The bunny ear method." She kept mixing up the loops. Laura's hand moved closer to his. "David, I'm scared. Not just of William, but of remembering everything. What if... No what-ifs tonight." His fingers brushed hers. "Tonight, you're home." She didn't pull away. His hand was warm, familiar, safe. Above them, stars broke through the clouds, and Laura found herself thinking of Grace's ceiling, of lullabies, of everything she'd almost lost forever. David's lips moved in silent prayer, his eyes closed, thumb rubbing gentle circles on her hand. She recognized the expression, his thankful face, she'd always called it. Her eyes grew heavy, the porch swing's rhythm mixing with cricket songs and distant wind through cornfields. David draped the old quilt around her shoulders, the one that smelled like home and history and hope. "Rest," he whispered. "I'll keep watch." Laura let herself drift. Grace's laughter from dinner still echoing in her memory, the sound stitching back together all the broken places inside her. Morning light poured through the kitchen windows, painting golden squares across the linoleum. Laura stood at the stove, spatula in hand, staring at the griddle like it might bite her. "The bubbles," Grace said from her perch on the counter. "You flip when the bubbles pop." Right. Bubbles. Laura watched the batter spread, willing the pancakes to cooperate. The first one stuck, tearing when she tried to turn it. The second came out lopsided, more triangle than circle. "That one's abstract art," Grace announced, stealing a piece. "Like Picasso, but breakfast." David leaned against the doorframe, coffee mug warming his hands. This, his girls in the kitchen, Grace's leg swinging, Laura's hair catching sunlight, felt like waking from a long, terrible dream. "Maybe we should have started with cereal," Laura said, scraping burnt bits off the griddle. "These are perfect." Grace grabbed the syrup. "Remember when you made them shaped like butterflies?" Butterflies? Laura's hand paused. Then, like a door opening, she saw it. Grace at 4, clapping as Laura arranged pancakes into wings. You ate the antennae first. Still do when Dad makes them, but his look more like moths. They ate together, Laura's pancakes improving with each batch. Grace chattered about her science project on constellations, how she'd picked Cassiopeia because it looked like a wonky W. David watched Laura remember how to be in this space, reaching for the jam without looking, knowing which drawer held the good forks. After breakfast, David suggested a drive into town. Laura tensed, but Grace had already grabbed her jacket, bouncing with excitement. I want to show you everything, she said, pulling Laura toward the door. The truck felt smaller with 3 of them, but right somehow. Laura's hand found the worn spot on the dash where she used to tap along to radio songs. Grace sat between them in the back, one hand holding David's over the console, the other gripping Laura's. Town looked exactly the same. Murphy's Hardware still needed new paint. The library flag still flew slightly crooked. David parked near the square, where the old oak spread its branches over picnic tables and swing sets. That's my tree, Grace announced, racing ahead. I can climb all the way to the bird nest. Laura followed, shading her eyes to watch Grace scramble up the trunk. Her daughter moved with confidence, knowing every foothold. Careful on that 3rd branch, Laura called, then stopped. How did she know about the weak spot? You taught her, David said quietly. Before. Said every kid needs a good climbing tree. Mrs. Patterson from the post office walked by, her schnauzer on its pink leash. She stopped mid-step, eyes widening. Laura? Laura Carter? Hello, Mrs. Patterson. Lord have mercy, we thought everyone said. The older woman pressed a hand to her chest. Where have you been, dear? Laura's fingers found David's. It's complicated. Well, you're home now. That's what matters. Mrs. Patterson squeezed Laura's arm, then hurried away, already pulling out her phone. Within minutes, others appeared. Tom from the bank, waving tentatively. Sarah, who ran the bakery, offering a warm hug that smelled like cinnamon. But Laura caught the whispers too, saw the pointed looks, the way some people studied her like she might evaporate. Mom, watch. Grace hung upside down from a branch, hair streaming toward the ground. Grace Ellen Carter, you'll give me a heart attack. The name came without thinking. Grace beamed, righting herself. You remembered my middle name. They stayed another hour, Grace showing her mother the library's reading garden, the fountain where people threw pennies, the bench where she ate lunch sometimes. Laura began to relax, even laughing when Grace demonstrated her cartwheel technique across the grass. David had almost forgotten to be watchful, caught up in this fragile normalcy. Then he saw it. A sleek black Mercedes parked across from their truck, engine running. The driver lowered his sunglasses. Even from this distance, David recognized the sharp jaw, the calculated stare. William Blake, the man from Laura's old company newsletters, the ones she'd shown him when she first got the job. Back then, Blake had seemed like success personified. Now he looked like a predator marking territory. Blake held David's gaze for 3 seconds, 4. Then he smiled, not warmth, but warning. Time to go, David said, his voice too sharp. Laura turned, following his stare. The color drained from her face. Her hand found Grace's shoulder, pulling her close. Mom? Get in the truck, baby. David positioned himself between his family and the Mercedes, keys already out. His hands stayed steady, but his chest felt too tight, his breath too shallow. They climbed in quickly, Grace confused, but responding to the urgency in their voices. The black car pulled away slowly, deliberately, leaving exhaust and menace hanging in the air. Was that... Laura's voice cracked. Yeah? Grace looked between them. Who was that man? Nobody, David said, starting the engine. Just nobody. But they all knew it was a lie. The morning's peace shattered like the pancakes Laura had dropped, impossible to piece back together. David drove home carefully, checking mirrors, while Laura held Grace's hand so tight her knuckles went white. The black Mercedes had vanished, but its message remained. They were being watched. The farmhouse felt different that evening. Shadows stretched longer across the kitchen floor, and every creak of the old boards made Laura flinch. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. "He found me." Her voice came out flat, empty. "William Blake found me." David pulled out the chair beside her. "We'll call the police." "File a report. With what evidence? That he parked across the street?" Laura's laugh held no humor. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "The people he owns." "Then help me understand." She stared into her mug. 2 years ago I was filing invoices, normal administrative work, but the numbers didn't add up. Money moving through shell companies, contracts for services that never happened. I documented everything, thinking my supervisor would want to know. But Blake owned the company. Blake was the company. When I brought it forward, he called me into his office, closed the door. Her fingers tightened on the ceramic. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, just explained very calmly how accidents happen, how Grace was such a pretty little girl, walking to school every day, how construction sites were dangerous places for mechanics like you. David's jaw clenched. He threatened our family. Not threatened, promised. Laura's hands shook, tea sloshing. He showed me photos. You at work, Grace at recess, our house. Said I had 2 choices, disappear completely or watch everyone I loved disappear instead. So you ran. I became nobody, worked cash jobs, never stayed anywhere long, thought if I stayed away, stayed quiet, he'd leave you alone. Laura. But I got careless. Stayed at the diner too long. Let myself believe maybe, she pushed back from the table, I have to go. Tonight. Before he... No. David caught her wrist gently. We're not running. Not this time. You didn't see what I saw in his eyes today. He won't just hurt me now. He'll punish me through you, through Grace. Then we fight back. Together. Laura pulled free, pacing to the window. Outside, darkness pressed against the glass. You can't fight money and power with good intentions. Mom? Grace stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Why are you scared? Laura's face crumpled. She knelt, pulling Grace close. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, baby. Sometimes we have to deal with consequences. Is it about the man in the black car? David and Laura exchanged glances over Grace's head. Come here, sweetheart. David opened his arms and Grace climbed into his lap. Remember how we talked about bullies at school? Sometimes grown-ups have bullies too. But you're supposed to tell a teacher. What if the bully owns the school? Grace considered this, then looked at Laura. You're going to leave again, aren't you? The words hung in the air like a blade. No, David said firmly. She's not. But Laura's eyes told a different story. She kissed Grace's forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I love you more than all the stars. That's what you used to say before. Grace's voice went small. Before you disappeared. Laura stood abruptly, fleeing down the hall. The bedroom door clicked shut. David held Grace tighter, feeling her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. She's just scared. We'll figure this out. Promise? Promise? He tucked Grace back into bed, sitting beside her until her breathing evened out. The rabbit stayed clutched against her chest, one ear wet with tears. David smoothed her hair, whispering prayers he wasn't sure he believed anymore. The house settled into uneasy quiet. David made coffee, checked the locks twice, peered through curtains at the empty road. No black Mercedes, no immediate threat. But Blake didn't need to be here. His shadow stretched across their lives without presence. Near midnight, David padded down the hall to check on Laura. The bedroom door stood ajar. Inside, moonlight fell across an empty bed, sheets still tucked neat. On the pillow lay a piece of paper, folded once. His hands trembled as he opened it. Laura's handwriting, careful and deliberate. I love you both too much to put you in danger. Please don't look for me. Take care of our girl. Tell her I'll carry her with me always. Forever yours, L. The note crumpled in his fist. She'd done it again. Vanished like smoke, thinking sacrifice meant love. David pressed his forehead against the doorframe, chest tight with rage and grief, battling for space. Grace's voice came from behind him. Daddy? He turned. She stood there in her nightgown, already knowing, already breaking. She left? David couldn't lie, not to those eyes. He nodded. Grace crumpled, and he caught her, carrying her to his room. She cried herself to sleep against his chest while he stared at the ceiling, planning. Blake thought he'd won, thought fear would scatter them like leaves. But Blake had never seen David truly fight for something. Outside wind moved through the corn, whispering promises or threats. David held his daughter close and made his own promise to the darkness. Laura would come home. Blake would answer for his crimes. This wasn't over. Morning light crept across the living room floor, finding David on the couch. Laura's note remained crushed in his fist, the paper soft from handling. His neck ached from the awkward angle, but physical pain felt distant compared to the hollow ache in his chest. Daddy? Grace stood by the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Morning, sweetheart. His voice came out rough. Let me make you some breakfast. Not hungry. She sat at the table anyway, tracing patterns in the wood grain with one finger. David scrambled eggs, made toast, poured orange juice. The familiar motions kept his hands busy while his mind churned. Grace pushed food around her plate without eating. We'll find her. The words scraped past the lump in his throat. I promise we'll... His voice cracked, betraying him. Grace looked up. You said she wouldn't leave. I know. You promised. I know, baby. I'm sorry. The drive to school felt endless. Grace stared out the window, clutching her backpack like armor. At the drop-off, she hesitated. What if Mom comes back while I'm gone? Then I'll come get you immediately. She nodded, not believing him, and walked toward the building. Other kids ran past, laughing. Grace moved through them like a ghost. David drove straight to the diner. The breakfast rush filled every booth, voices and silverware creating familiar chaos. Maria spotted him immediately, abandoning a coffee pot to meet him at the door. She never came in. Maria's eyes held sympathy. Her shift started 2 hours ago. Did she say anything? Leave any message? Nothing. I'm sorry, David. He slumped into a corner booth. Maria brought coffee without asking, sitting across from him during a lull. She's running because she's terrified, not because she doesn't love you. Same result, though. David stared into the black coffee. Grace woke up without her mother, again. Fear makes people do desperate things, especially when it comes to protecting family. How do I fight someone like Blake? Money, lawyers, connections. He has everything. You have something he doesn't. Maria squeezed his hand. People who actually care about you. This whole town watched you search for 2 years. We're not giving up now. After leaving the diner, David drove to the sheriff's station. The small building smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Sheriff Reynolds looked up from his desk, already weary despite the early hour. David? Heard Laura came back and left again because of William Blake. The sheriff's expression shifted, careful neutrality replacing casual interest. That's a serious accusation. David explained everything. Laura's discovery of illegal dealings, the threats, her flight to protect them. Reynolds listened, occasionally jotting notes, his face growing more troubled. Blake's been untouchable for 15 years. The sheriff set down his pen. Every time someone raises concerns, lawyers appear. Witnesses recant, evidence disappears. So you won't help? Didn't say that. Reynolds leaned back, chair creaking. Said it won't be easy. I'll look into it, ask some questions. But David, be careful. Blake doesn't just use lawyers. Man like that has other ways of solving problems. The implied threat hung between them. David nodded, understanding. That evening, homework complete and dishes done, David tucked Grace into bed. She'd barely spoken during dinner, picking at her food like morning. He sat on the edge of her mattress, smoothing her blanket. "Daddy has to check something outside. I'll be right on the porch, okay?" She nodded, already turning toward the wall. He stood to leave when her whisper stopped him. "Dear God, please bring Mommy back. She's scared and alone, and we need her. Daddy needs her. I promise I'll be good. I'll eat my vegetables and do my homework without being asked. Just please bring her home. Amen." David's throat closed completely. He kissed her forehead and escaped to the porch before she could see his tears. The old Bible sat on the porch swing where he'd left it months ago, gathering dust. His mother's Bible passed down through generations. He picked it up, feeling the worn leather cover, remembering his mother's hands holding it during her final days. The countryside stretched dark and vast. Somewhere out there, Laura ran alone, believing her absence kept them safe. David opened the Bible, though the words blurred through tears. "I don't know if you're listening," his whisper felt loud in the quiet night. "Haven't talked to you since Laura disappeared the first time. Guess I was angry. Still am, maybe." Wind stirred the corn, a sound like whispered responses. "But I'm out of options. Can't fight Blake alone. Can't protect Grace from this pain. Can't bring Laura home on my own strength because I don't have any left." The admission broke something loose in his chest. "So I'm asking. Begging, really. Give me strength. Show me the way. Help me protect my family. Help me bring her home. Not for me, for Grace. She still believes in you. Don't let Blake destroy that too." Stars emerged between clouds, distant and cold. David sat holding the Bible, not reading, just gripping it like an anchor. Inside, Grace slept fitfully, probably dreaming of her mother. Tomorrow he'd keep fighting. Tonight he'd admitted the truth. He couldn't do this alone. The prayer felt rusty, uncertain, but it was a beginning. The black car sat across from Grace's school like a predator waiting. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his breakfast turning to lead in his stomach. The same sleek vehicle from the park, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever watched from inside. He abandoned his truck at an angle, not bothering to straighten it, and rushed through the school's front doors. The secretary looked up, startled by his urgency. "I need Grace Carter. Family emergency. No arguments, no explanations." Within minutes, Grace appeared with her teacher, confusion written across her small face. "Daddy? What's wrong?" "We need to go home, sweetheart." He kept his voice calm, taking her backpack. Only when they reached the truck did he glance back. The black car hadn't moved, but David felt eyes tracking them. At the farmhouse, David locked the doors and pulled the curtains. Grace settled at the kitchen table with homework, sensing his tension but not questioning it. 20 minutes later, Maria's car pulled up the drive too fast, gravel spraying. She knocked frantically. David let her in, noting her pallor, the tremor in her hands. 2 men came to the diner. Maria glanced at Grace, lowering her voice. Asked about Laura, where she lived, who she talked to. One of them, I recognized him from before, Blake's driver, the one who picks up his lunch orders. Did they threaten you? Not directly, but the way they asked. Maria wrapped her arms around herself. Like they already knew the answers, like they were warning me. David guided her to a chair, poured water with steady hands despite his racing thoughts. Grace looked up from her homework, too perceptive to miss the adult's fear. Is Mom okay? She's going to be. David squeezed her shoulder. Maria's going to stay with you for a bit while I take care of something. Grace's face crumpled slightly, but she nodded, returning to her math problems with forced concentration. Maria followed him to the porch, voice dropping to a whisper. Where would she go if she's hiding, really hiding? David thought back through their conversations, Laura's stories from her youth. Then it clicked. A memory from their third date, Laura laughing about the cabin her uncle owned outside town, her thinking spot when teenage life got overwhelming. The old Mitchell place. Abandoned for years, but Laura knew it well. That's 15 miles into nothing. David, if Blake's men are watching, then I need to find her first. Maria gripped his arm. Be careful. These aren't people who play fair. Inside, David hugged Grace tight, promising to return soon. She clung for an extra moment, as if sensing the weight of his departure. Maria locked the door behind him, her face visible through the kitchen window, already moving to distract Grace with cocoa and cookies. The drive stretched through farmland into wilderness. David's truck bounced over deteriorating roads, then dirt tracks barely visible through overgrowth. The sun sank lower, painting everything golden, then orange, then gray. 3 cabins stood in various stages of decay before he found it. The Mitchell place, better preserved than the others. Smoke threaded from the chimney, barely visible against the darkening sky. David parked at a distance, approaching on foot. Through a cracked window, firelight flickered. He knocked softly. Movement inside. A long pause, then Laura's voice, barely audible, "Go away." "Laura, it's me." The door opened a crack, her eye visible, red-rimmed and suspicious. Seeing him alone, she opened it wider, but immediately backed away. "You can't be here." "If they followed you." "No one followed me." David stepped inside, closing the door. The cabin held minimal furniture, a cot, a chair, canned goods on a shelf. Laura huddled near the fire, wearing the same clothes from 2 nights ago, her face gaunt with exhaustion. "You have to leave, now. Before they find this place. I'm not leaving without you." "David, please." Tears ran fresh down her cheeks. "I'm trying to protect you, to protect Grace. Grace cried herself to sleep again last night. She prays for you every night, wondering what she did wrong to make you leave." Laura crumbled at that, sinking into the chair, sobbing into her hands. "She did nothing wrong, neither did you. This is my fault." David knelt beside her. "Then tell me, all of it." The story poured out between sobs. Working late at Blake's company, finding discrepancies in the books, digging deeper, discovering embezzlement, money laundering, connections to dangerous people, her attempt to report it thinking the authorities would help. Blake found out first. Had his men corner me in the parking garage. Her voice went flat, mechanical. Said he knew where Grace went to school. Your work schedule. Your mother's nursing home before she passed. Said accidents happen every day. So you ran. What choice did I have? Go to the police? Blake owns half of them. Fight back? With what? I was nobody. A bookkeeper who stumbled onto something massive. You're not nobody. You're Grace's mother, my wife, the strongest woman I know. Strong? She laughed bitterly. I'm hiding in a cabin, afraid of shadows. David took her hands, feeling how cold they'd grown. We face him together. Running hasn't worked, hiding hasn't worked, but together, together we're just more targets. Together, we're a family, and families protect each other. Laura searched his face, war playing out behind her eyes, fear against hope, isolation against connection. I have evidence, photos of documents, recordings, hidden but retrievable, enough to destroy him if it reached the right people. Then we make sure it does. David, you don't understand the risk. I understand our daughter needs her mother. I understand I need my wife. I understand that living in fear is no life at all. Laura's resistance finally broke completely. She collapsed forward into his arms, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. David held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, remembering what wholeness felt like. We're not running anymore, he whispered into her hair. Whatever comes, we face it standing up, as a family. Laura nodded against his shoulder, her tears soaking through his shirt. Outside, darkness fell completely, but inside the cabin, the fire cast warm light, over two people, choosing courage over fear. The drive back stretched through darkness. Laura hunched low in the passenger seat. David checked the mirrors constantly, but only empty road reflected back. At the farmhouse, he killed the headlights before turning into the drive. Maria met them at the door, relief flooding her face. Behind her, Grace stood in pajamas, clutching her sketchbook. "Mommy?" Laura dropped to her knees as Grace flew into her arms. The child's thin body shook with sobs, fingers tangling in Laura's hair, gripping as if her mother might dissolve. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. Don't leave again. Please don't leave. I won't. I promise." Maria slipped past them into the night, squeezing David's shoulder as she went. He locked the door behind her, drawing curtains across every window. They spent that night in the living room, Grace wedged between her parents on the couch, refusing to let go of Laura's hand, even in sleep. David dozed fitfully, starting at every creak of the old house. Morning brought a strange normalcy. Laura made scrambled eggs while Grace set the table, chattering about her drawings. David watched from the doorway, memorizing the scene, sunlight through checked curtains, his daughter's laugh, his wife's gentle corrections about too much salt. They kept to the house. David called in sick to work, his boss understanding without asking questions. Small towns knew when to offer space. Laura's recovery came in pieces. Making Grace's lunch, she remembered exactly how to cut the crusts. Reading bedtime stories, she recalled all the voices. Her hands found their old rhythm braiding Grace's hair. "Tell me about second grade," Laura said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Grace's bedroom floor. Grace launched into tales of spelling tests and recess games. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, the class hamster named Whiskers. Laura absorbed every detail, rebuilding 2 years of absence. "And Tommy Chin tried to kiss me, but I said kissing was gross." "Good girl," Laura smoothed her daughter's hair. Plenty of time for that later, much later. David found them like that, heads bent together over homework, and felt his chest constrict with gratitude and fear in equal measure. The third day, old Mrs. Patterson stopped by with a casserole. Through the screen door, she mentioned folks had noticed strangers in town. Men in expensive suits asking questions at the gas station, the grocery store. "Just thought you should know," she said, eyes kind but worried. That evening, washing dishes, Laura's hands stilled in the soapy water. "They're looking for me." "We knew they would." "Maybe I should—" "No." David turned her to face him. "No more running." Through the window, headlights swept across the yard. David's blood chilled. A black Lincoln town car crunched over gravel, stopping near the porch. 3 figures emerged, William Blake in the center, his silver hair catching the porch light, flanked by 2 younger men whose suits couldn't hide the bulk of shoulder holsters. "Stay inside." David moved toward the door. "David, both of you stay inside." He stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut. Blake stood at the bottom of the steps, hands clasped like a patient teacher. "Mr. Carter, we need to discuss your wife." "Nothing to discuss." Blake's smile held no warmth. "I disagree. Laura has something that belongs to me, information that could be misinterpreted." "You mean evidence of your crimes?" The smile flickered. "Careful. Slander is serious business." "So is threatening my family." "Who's threatening?" Blake spread his hands. "I'm offering a solution." Laura returns what she took, signs a simple confidentiality agreement, and everyone moves forward. You keep your job at Morrison's Auto. Your daughter keeps her peaceful childhood. That sounds like a threat to me. It's reality. Morrison does contract work for my companies. One word from me. Blake shrugged. Jobs are scarce around here. Be practical. The door opened behind David. Laura stepped out, Grace clinging to her leg. There she is. Blake's eyes glittered. "Laura, you look unwell. This stress isn't good for you." "Leave my family alone." "Your family?" Blake laughed softly. "You abandoned them." "Left them wondering if you were dead. I'm not the villain here. You beat her. David's fists clenched. Threatened our daughter. Prove it. Blake's voice hardened. You think anyone will believe her? A woman who disappeared, clearly unstable, making wild accusations against a respected businessman? One of Blake's men shifted, jacket opening slightly. David noted the gun, calculating distances, knowing he couldn't reach Blake before. You can't hide her forever, Blake said. This town is small. My reach is long. Be smart, Carter. Grace's small voice cut through the tension. Why are you so mean? Blake's gaze dropped to the child. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, perhaps disgust that a child would dare address him. Leave. Now. David stepped forward. Blake smiled again, that cold teacher's smile. 3 days. After that, things become complicated. Paul. The men returned to the car. Blake paused at the door, looking back. Beautiful family, Carter. Shame if something happened to it. The Lincoln reversed, tires spitting gravel, taillights disappearing into darkness. Inside, Grace's voice trembled. Is he going to take Mommy away? Laura knelt, gathering her daughter close, meeting David's eyes over the small blonde head. Not this time, baby. Not this time. Dawn broke gray and cold. David found Laura at the kitchen table, papers spread before her. Bank statements, emails, photographs of bruises she'd documented before fleeing. It's time. She nodded, jaw set. Past time. They dropped Grace at school together, both walking her to the classroom door. Mrs. Henderson took one look at their faces and squeezed Laura's hand. Whatever you need. The sheriff's office smelled of burnt coffee and old wood. Sheriff Tom Reynolds sat behind his desk, weathered face neutral, as Laura laid out everything. The embezzlement scheme, the threats, the night Blake's men cornered her in the parking garage, leaving bruises that took weeks to fade. I have proof. Laura pushed the documents forward. Account numbers, wire transfers, names? Reynolds studied the papers, occasionally glancing at Blake's name. His fingers drummed the desk. This is substantial, but Blake owns half this county. Tom. David leaned forward. You know what's right. Right doesn't always win, David. Blake has lawyers, connections. He threatened my daughter. Laura's voice cut sharp. A 10-year-old child. The sheriff's drumming stopped. Maria appeared in the doorway, having closed the diner to be there. Behind her, Mr. Morrison from the auto shop. Mrs. Patterson, even young Tommy Chen's mother. Word had spread. We saw her, Maria said. Saw how scared she was. How she jumped at shadows. Blake's men have been asking questions, Morrison added. Intimidating folks. Making threats, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Not so subtle ones. Reynolds looked at the gathering crowd, then at the evidence, then at Laura's fading bruises photographed in stark detail. All right. He stood reaching for his hat. Let's do this right. Judge Harrison owes me a favor. By noon, Reynolds had his warrant. By evening, 3 squad cars rolled up Blake's circular drive. David and Laura waited at home, Grace between them on the couch watching the clock. The phone rang at 7:30. Got him, Reynolds said. And more. His safe had enough evidence to put him away for decades. Laura collapsed against David's shoulder, shaking. Grace wrapped her arms around both parents. Is it over? Grace whispered. Yeah, baby. David kissed her head. It's over. News traveled fast in small towns. By morning, Blake's arrest dominated conversation at the diner, the grocery store, the gas station. People who'd whispered about Laura's return now spoke openly of her courage. Takes guts, old Patterson said at the hardware store. Standing up to a man like that. Always knew something was off about Blake, claimed Jenkins, who'd never said any such thing. But the praise felt hollow to Laura. She startled at car doors slamming, checked locks twice, 3 times. Grace shadowed her constantly, afraid to let her mother out of sight. We need help, David said gently that Thursday night. All of us? Sunday came crisp and bright. The church bells rang across town, As the Carter family climbed the steps together, Laura hesitated at the door. She hadn't been inside since before she disappeared. "Together," David said, taking her hand. Grace took her other hand. "Together." They sat in their old pew, third row from the front. Whispers rippled through the congregation, but Pastor Williams smiled warmly from the pulpit. "Before we begin, I'd like us to pray for a family who's walked through fire and come out the other side." He didn't name them, didn't need to. "Lord, we thank you for restoration, for justice, for the courage to face our fears and the strength to overcome them." Laura's shoulders shook. David pulled her closer. The opening hymn began, "Amazing Grace." The coincidence felt like providence. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Laura's tears came freely now, 2 years of fear and pain flowing out. Grace's young voice rose clear beside her. "That saved a wretch like me." The congregation seemed to swell around them, voices lifting in harmony. Mrs. Patterson's alto, Morrison's rumbling bass, Maria's sweet soprano from 2 rows back. "I once was lost, but now am found." Laura found her voice on the second verse, tremulous at first, then stronger. David's hand tightened around hers. "Was blind, but now I see." Pastor Williams stepped down from the pulpit during the final verse, standing before them. "Sometimes we lose our way," he said softly. "Sometimes fear drives us into darkness. But love, God's love, family's love, community's love, that light always leads us home." The hymn ended, but no one sat. The congregation pressed closer, hands reaching out to touch the family's shoulders, offering silent support. Grace looked up at her parents with wonder. "Why is everyone crying?" "Happy tears, baby," Laura managed. "These are happy tears." They stood together at the altar as Pastor Williams blessed them, the weight of 2 years beginning to lift. Not gone, healing would take time, but lighter, bearable. The morning sun streamed through stained glass, painting rainbow patterns across their joined hands. Around them, the community sang, their voices a shield against past darkness, a promise of brighter days ahead. 6 weeks passed like a gentle tide washing away debris from a storm. The courthouse steps gleamed in April sunshine as Laura descended them for the last time, her testimony complete. Blake's lawyer had tried to shake her, but her voice never wavered. "He threatened my daughter," she'd said clearly. "Said accidents happen to little girls who have curious mothers." The jury's faces had hardened at that. Even Blake's money couldn't buy sympathy after those words. David waited at the bottom of the steps, Grace bouncing beside him in her Sunday dress, the yellow one with daisies that Laura had bought her last week. "How'd it go, Mom?" Grace asked, though she'd been in the gallery, sketching quietly while her mother spoke. "It's done." Laura smoothed her daughter's hair. "All done." The news came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. 25 to life. Blake's estate would be liquidated, damages paid to his victims. Laura would receive enough to ensure Grace's college fund, and then some. "Blood money," Laura said quietly when the check arrived. "Justice money," David corrected. "For Grace's future." Spring crept across the valley in shades of green and gold. The apple tree behind their farmhouse erupted in white blossoms, petals drifting like snow when the wind caught them. David spent his evenings rebuilding the porch swing that had sat broken for 2 years. "Hand me that wrench," he called to Grace, who'd appointed herself his assistant. She passed it over, paint smudged on her nose from helping Laura refresh the kitchen cabinets that afternoon. "Mom says dinner's almost ready." Through the kitchen window, Laura moved with remembered grace, stirring something that smelled like her mother's beef stew recipe. She'd been recovering pieces of herself, recipes, songs, the way she used to braid Grace's hair on Sunday mornings. "Tell her 5 more minutes," David said, tightening the final bolt. The swing hung true, chains creaking gently in the evening breeze. After dinner, the stew was perfect, just as David remembered. They wandered into the yard. Grace ran ahead, spinning in circles, until she collapsed dizzy in the grass. "Come sit," she called, patting the ground beside her. They settled under the apple tree, its branches heavy with blossoms. David leaned against the trunk, Laura curled into his side, Grace sprawled across both their laps like she had as a toddler. "Tell me about when you met," Grace said, though she knew the story by heart. "Your dad was fixing my car," Laura began, finding the familiar rhythm. "Charged me twice what it was worth." "Did not," David protested, playing his part. "You just didn't appreciate quality work. He asked me for coffee to make up for it. And you said yes because of my charm." "I said yes because I needed a ride home." Grace giggled, the sound bright as birdsong. These stories had been absent for 2 years, and now they flowed like water returning to a dry riverbed. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in pastels. Laura shifted, her voice soft. "I thought I'd lost everything." David's arm tightened around her. Those nights in that cabin, then working at the diner, not remembering. She trailed off, then started again. "I knew something was missing. Like a hole in my chest. Even when I couldn't remember your faces, I remembered the feeling of being loved." "Mom," Grace said, sitting up to wrap her arms around Laura's neck. "But maybe God was just giving us a second chance." Laura kissed Grace's forehead. "A chance to see how precious this all is." "Duh." David smiled, his voice rough with emotion. "And this time, we'll never let go." "Never," Grace agreed fiercely. A mockingbird called from the apple tree, cycling through its evening repertoire. Grace began humming, soft and sweet, the lullaby that had brought Laura back to them. After a moment, Laura joined in, their voices weaving together like braided rope. The last notes drifted across the yard as stars began to appear. Venus first, bright and steady, then the smaller lights filling in the darkening sky. "Getting cold," David said, though none of them moved. "One more minute," Grace bargained. "One more," Laura agreed. But it was 5, then 10, before they finally stood, grass clinging to their clothes. They walked back toward the farmhouse, hands linked, Grace in the middle, swinging their arms. The kitchen windows glowed golden, warm, and welcoming. Laura had left the light on over the stove, and it spilled out onto the porch, onto David's rebuilt swing, onto the path they walked together. At the door, Grace paused. "We're home." "Yeah, baby," Laura said, her voice full. "We're home." They went inside together, the door closing gently behind them. Through the windows, their shadows moved in the lit kitchen, David washing dishes, Laura drying, Grace chattering about school tomorrow. Normal things. Precious things. A family restored, writing new memories over old wounds, their future stretching ahead like an open road under clear skies. The apple tree stood sentinel in the yard, its blossoms luminous in the moonlight, bearing witness to this second chance, this grace that had brought them full circle. Back to each other, back to hope, back home. If you enjoyed the story I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy, please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.